Office. I'm going to introduce you to DEA Special Agent in Charge for the state of Arizona, Sherry Oz, as well as Chief Magnus. Um, Special Agent in Charge Oz will give a few brief words, and Chief Magnus will go in further detail.
Good afternoon. My name is Sherry Oz. I'm the Special Agent in Charge for the DEA here in Arizona. This morning, 2 DEA special agents and a task force officer from the Tucson Police Department were shot during a law enforcement operation here in Tucson. I am deeply saddened to confirm that 1 special agent died as a result of the injuries sustained during the shooting. A 2nd special agent is in critical condition, and a task force officer is in stable condition. Thank you for keeping the DEA in your thoughts and your prayers.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Magnus. I'm the police chief here in Tucson, Arizona, and with me is our mayor, Regina Romero. So I have, frankly, very limited information that I can share with you at this time, but I'm going to try to lay out the basic sequence of what happened this morning starting at 8 a.m. So this incident occurred on a train that was stationary at the downtown Tucson train station, which is located at 400 North Toole Street in Tucson. What happened this morning involved a situation with our Regional Counter-Narcotics Alliance. They go by CNA. And this alliance includes both members of the Tucson Police Department. It's a regional alliance as well as the DEA. So the reason why the alliance members were at the train station this morning and boarding the train was to do what we refer to as a routine interdiction check. In other words, they were checking for illegal guns, money, drugs. This is something they do, as I said, routinely at pretty much all transit hubs. It's not just trains, it involves buses, they're at the airports as well. So what happened is several officers boarded the train, and they ultimately made contact with 2 individuals who were on the 2nd level of, this is a double-decker car on the Amtrak train. They detained basically 1 individual, and while they were dealing with 1 individual, a 2nd individual, Hispanic male by appearance, somewhere in his 20s to 30s, produced a handgun and opened fire on the officers. There was a TPD officer, again part of this alliance group, that was on the platform, and he heard the rounds and ran directly into the dangerous situation in order to be of whatever possible help he could. As he entered into the train, he was also shot. At that point, the suspect, after exchanging rounds with the officers, barricaded himself in the bathroom, which is on the lower level of one of the basically 2 cars where this happens. I think the bathroom's on 1 car, and then the passengers where this mostly happened was in the other car. So ultimately, some time went on. There wasn't clarity whether this suspect was still alive or not, whether he had been shot or not, but ultimately it was determined that the suspect in the bathroom was in fact deceased. And he was declared dead at the scene. So the seriously injured DEA officer, keeping in mind there's 1 officer who was deceased, but the seriously injured DEA officer was then evacuated from the train and taken by TPD officers in the back of a patrol car, in fact, because they were trying to move as expeditiously as possible, taken to the hospital here where we're at, Banner UMC. The other officers who were injured were taken by EMS to the same hospital here. So I really want to reflect first on the terrible tragedy that this is, not just for the DEA, obviously, but for everyone in law enforcement. It's really horrific, and we're all just coming to terms with just how terrible a loss this is. But I also want to reflect on the really heroic actions of the officers at the scene, who literally ran towards the danger into the car where there was an active shooting situation going on, and in fact were not only able to evacuate the critically injured officer and get the other officers off the train, but also, and very importantly, assure that none of the passengers on the train, and we're not quite clear on how many, we know roughly that in the car that most of this occurred in, there were give or take a dozen other passengers, but we were able to make sure that they were safe. So there were no passengers on the train who were injured, nor were there any bystanders in or around the platform, including folks who work at the train station. So I just think it's kind of incredible here that there weren't other people that were hurt, even though we're completely so saddened by the loss of the officer. Our officer is here, as I mentioned, being treated. His condition is stable. He's going to be here for observation overnight, but we're not providing any more information about the names or specifics about the injuries of any of these three officers. And as I said, there's very limited information that I'll be able to provide, although I'll do my best to take a few questions.
Were the suspects, have they boarded here onto the train in Tucson, or have they boarded some other time, like in Los Angeles or some time before that?
Yeah, I not only don't know the answer to that question, but it's really not something I could speak to at this point of the investigation.
And what was the destination of the train?
I'm sorry, I don't know that. We're still working to figure out exactly where the train was coming from, where it was headed to. All we know is that it was stationary at the Tucson train station.
I know you mentioned this earlier, but one person you said was detained. What was found?
Can't speak to anything that was found or any of the specifics regarding that individual who was detained, but he is in custody at this time.
Do we know how often the Counter Narcotics Alliance goes out there to do this on the train, that surveillance with drugs and weapons and things like that?
I can't speak to what their schedule is. All I can tell you is that they do routine interdiction efforts not only on trains, but as I said, also on buses and involving planes at the airport.
Has it been determined if the deceased subject died by his own hand or if it was during the firefight?
That's still under active investigation.
You say that the deceased suspect is a Hispanic and 20, 30 males. Do you have any details on the suspect that was detained?
No, I'm afraid I don't right now.
Was it a male?
I believe so, but I can't confirm that.
So did the entire incident happen on the train, or were there shots actually fired outside of the train as well?
My understanding is that the incident unfolded and occurred on the train, although there were officers from outside of the train who rushed into the train. So there was an evacuation of persons, and at that point this was still a very active situation with the suspect still firing rounds.
So I just want to confirm then we've got one DEA agent who's passed away, one who's in serious condition, and a TPD officer who's in stable condition?
I think you're pretty close. That's right. A DEA officer who is deceased, another DEA officer who's in critical condition, and a Tucson police officer who's in stable condition but is being admitted.
Is there any indication right now of what that initial interaction with the officers and that suspect they ended up detaining, what that was about? Was it narcotics involved? Was it firearms?
I just don't know that yet. Tucson Police was the agency who responded. And I can tell you, having been working at that time, this was put out as a citywide response. There were over 50 officers who responded to the scene. I think their response was phenomenal. And again, the officers that worked not only to assure the safety of the passengers on the train and the others on the platform, but also who were responsible for getting at least one of the injured parties to the hospital. I have nothing but admiration for their courage, really heroics under the situation.
Are you able to share how many years the PPD officer has in duty and how he is?
No, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
We will send further updates as the investigation continues, so they'll be in the email or our media release, excuse me. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have a Spanish speaker on the fourth